For more on this, we are joined via Zoom by Linga Mohowa, who is the head of Oxfam in Malawi. Linga Lireni, thank you so much for joining us. Look, now 100 days on after the devastating Cyclone Freddy hit, what key observations has Oxfam made in the aftermath?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. So it's really been a challenging time, but maybe let me start on a positive note that I think we did see quite a big show of solidarity from SADC as a region. We saw the SADC team coming for assessments, and we've also seen Malawi being supported by SADC governments after the president of Malawi, President Chakwera, had declared a state of disaster. So I think that's a key observation, and I think that's the direction of travel for the region in terms of being in solidarity when it comes to such humanitarian crisis. I think the second observation is that we wish Cyclone Freddy response would have received more funding than it has received now. And it is a pity because the countries that are suffering from such climatic shocks, like Malawi and Mozambique in the case of Cyclone Freddy, are the ones that are least contributing to issues of climate crisis. And we wish that those that cause the greatest damage, those that contribute the most in terms of carbon emissions, should be able to actually do much more in terms of supporting countries like Malawi and Mozambique to recover from such devastation, because it's not really our making. And from our perspective as Oxfam, we think that such crisis is actually increasing the inequality, global inequalities between the rich and the poor. And for Malawi, I certainly know the country is really facing a huge crisis, considering that we are coming from the backdrop of COVID-19. We're coming from a backdrop of cholera cases that have been recorded as the highest in the past 10 years for Malawi. And now we do have the Cyclone Freddy to deal with in terms of recovery and reconstruction. So it's not easy. I was down in the field and I saw quite a lot of devastation. People are still waiting for support, and that support is not able to come by. The president had made a call on development partners to support, but it's trickling in very slowly. And I must say that the situation is dire. 100 days after Cyclone Freddy, it appears that we are not yet out of the woods.
Interesting, Linga. Now, let's recount or perhaps recap on the number of fatalities following, of course, the cyclone, as well as the number of lives, the provinces and the districts that are or were actually affected by the cyclone.
Well, it's really been unprecedented. We have had a death toll that's close to 1,000 people, because at last count, the death toll was about 679 people. But we know that 537 are still missing, and these are presumed dead. So we are talking about a death toll of about 1,000 people. We're talking about almost 659,000 people that were displaced. At a point, Malawi had almost 700 camps, people that were not able to be in their households and they had to go to the camps. We're talking about 2.2 million people that were affected, and we're talking about almost 2,000 people that faced injuries. This is really, really unprecedented for Malawi. And of course, when you look at the count of districts that were affected, it almost half the country, because we had 15 districts that were really affected by this cyclone in both the southern region and the central region. And we have had Cyclone Ida in 2019, we had floods in 2015, we had Tropical Anna, Cyclone Gombe in 2021. But I must say that Cyclone Freddy has really been unprecedented in terms of the damage for Malawi. And put simply, in terms of the cost that we are facing, the post-disaster assessment that the government coordinated with funding from development partners shows that the disaster effect alone is up to the cost of $506 million, and that Malawi would have to cough about $680 million for recovery and reconstruction, and this will take us about 5 years for us to get to a point where we were before Cyclone Freddy. So it's really been unprecedented.
Linga, look, how has food security been affected, or how is food security going forward going to be affected in the coming months? In my intro there, I mentioned about 37.9% already increase in food inflation, and apparently most Malawians are living below the poverty line. How are they affording food?
It's very difficult, and just mind you, before Cyclone Freddy, the government had already released official figures that 3.8 million people were going to face, they are going to miss their food entitlements between November 2022 to March 2023. So the country was already facing a huge food deficit, and we're already preparing to respond to the traditionally lean season. And when you look at what Cyclone Freddy did, it wiped out almost, 54,000 hectares of mature crop. And you're talking about staple food like maize. You're also talking about other foods crops that were actually maturing and people should have been harvesting between March and April and May. And all that has been lost. And I think, as you rightly put it, between the harvest period around April to 9, we typically see the food prices, the maize prices particularly, go down. But that has not been the case. We are looking at a bag of maize that's going for high, the steepest I think ever recorded. And when you look at people that have lost their livelihoods, you look at people that have lost their fields, and they're looking at the markets for them to be able to buy, it's not possible. That's why 2 weeks ago, people were telling me they are having to withdraw children so that they do not pay school fees, school materials. They don't have to buy school materials so that they can buy food. People are having to sacrifice other things, loss of dignity, so that they are able to get food. And a UNICEF report that's just been released in May this year has actually shown that almost 500,000 young people are facing malnutrition. And obviously, I must say, this is directly attributable to the loss of food and livelihoods that majority of Malawians are facing in these affected districts and regions. So it is very difficult because we all know that when people miss their food entitlements, they begin to use negative coping strategies. And of course, I was witness to that because people told me that they're having to withdraw children, which means that a whole future of young people could be sacrificed because parents are having to deal with the little that they have for them to be able to get food from wherever they can get the food. So it's not easy for Malawi.
Not easy at all. Linga, I know you mentioned earlier on that, of course, there are, various interventions by various groups like SADC that are currently assisting. But how are they assisting those families that were displaced or those communities? And what do you think is the kind of intervention as well as assistance that is needed at this stage? And what can we foresee if such is not met or attended to?
Well, we appreciate the support that has come in from SADC and other international governments, but as I indicated, Malawi needs that huge sum that I recounted, 680 million, to start the recovery and reconstruction. The UN launched cholera and Cyclone Freddy appeal for Malawi, and I think they were looking at being able to get about 115 million. But I must say that up until now, we've only been able to get 28% of what was needed in the appeal. So money is coming in, but it's too slow and too little. And this actually shows that we are not just with climate crisis, we are with climate injustice. As I indicated earlier, Malawi, the other countries in the region, they are the least polluters, and yet they face the biggest brunt of these climate shocks. So I think right now it's the issue around securing the livelihoods of people, being able to support Malawi to meet the food entitlements of these people. I'm so sure that beyond the 3.8 million, now the number must be, doubled, because you're talking about 202 million people that were affected by Cyclone Freddy. And of course, this would also have a very big dent on the, it has a very big dent on the microeconomic. We know Malawi was already facing a limited fiscal space, and I think these unforeseen expenditures are going to actually exert more pressure on the fiscus. And I mean, I can't say it any better than just asking the international community to be able to support Malawi. 24% of our expenditure for the 2023-2024 budget is going to go towards debt servicing, which already means that there is a lot that is being taken out servicing our debt, and there is very little that government has to be able to meet the whole cost of recovery and reconstruction. So we need money to be able to support the now needs, and the now needs are to do with shelter, because we know housing was one of the sectors that was most affected. We need to deal with the issues of food security for the people. We need to deal with issues of infrastructure, recovering from the huge damage that was made to essential infrastructure like power lines, education institutions, and all that. So I think we need to be able to support Malawi to the greatest extent possible, so that the essential services are being met and people do not lose their dignity because of the Cyclone Freddy impacts.
All right.
But in the long run, be able to support Malawi.
All right. We're going to leave it there, Linga. Thank you so much for your contributions this evening. That is Linga Lireni Mihowa, the Oxfam in Southern Africa Gender Justice Lead, talking to us there about, of course, 100 days after Cyclone Henry.